I'm Dr. John Gartner.
And I'm Dr. Harry Segal.
And welcome to this pre-election session of Shrinking Trump.
John, this is our 27th episode. We've been at this for 6 months. And we began, as our audience may know, because we were concerned as psychologists, and John had always taken the lead as far as warning the public about Donald Trump's severe personality disorder. But we began the show because we saw signs of dementia that Trump was exhibiting that was alarming us, first because he might become the next president, and second because no one seemed to be noticing it. In fact, all they were doing was talking about how old Biden was. Mm-hmm. The press really was dumbing this down, and John was having difficulties even getting the press to talk about the psychopathology of Donald Trump. A lot of that has changed. We've seen more press awareness. We also have a candidate in Kamala Harris who has been calling Trump out on his psychopathology, maybe not in detail, but referring to him as unstable and unhinged. And John and I are still doing the work we're trying to do to raise awareness of these mental health issues as they apply to the former president and candidate, and also noticing the psychological strengths of Kamala. But now we're approaching the election. It is, as we record this on a Thursday, 100 hours away. What do you think, John?
You know, Harry, I think it would be impossible to overstate the drama of this moment. I really believe that the fate of humanity is balancing on a knife's edge. And the 8 years of almost constant work that I and we have done, right, to warn the public about Donald Trump now really comes down to what's going to happen in 100 hours.
Yes. And the consequences couldn't be more dire if Trump wins, given his severe psychopathology, his lack of morality, his attraction to dictators. The fate of Ukraine is actually is resting on this election, among other things.
Yeah. Well, the fate of the entire Western world and the entire Western alliance. Yes. It truly is. Civilization itself actually hangs in the balance, and maybe even our physical survival. So the consequences couldn't be more dire, and the contrast couldn't be more extreme.
No.
Between what I would call good and evil. A tale of two rallies. We're going to focus today on two rallies. One, Kamala's rally on the Ellipse, and secondly, Donald Trump's cosplay reenactment of the American Hitler rally in 1939 at Madison Square Garden. Normally, we do Kamala kind of at the end, but because we're showing this contrast, we're going to have a much more extended section about her speech. But I just wanted to show the opening 2 minutes in the beginning of our program. And one of the things that, Harry, I thought about when I was listening to this speech, I kept thinking, this is so historic. This is so important. It reminded me, I kept thinking of the Gettysburg Address. And I kept asking myself, why do I keep thinking about the Gettysburg Address? And then it occurred to me, that also was a speech at the scene of a Civil War battle. Right? This was a Civil War battle. And she's standing there on the Ellipse talking about, drawing the contrast between the person who tried to overthrow the government and the possibility of a new beginning for America.
I think that's a great analogy. That these forces are opposing each other, and in this case, for this election, so balanced. I don't think as balanced as people think, but still, we're talking about the difference of 2 or 3%.
Yeah. Well, let's see Kamala's opening comments on the Ellipse.
Thank you, everyone. So listen, 1 week from today, you will have the chance to make a decision that directly impacts your life, the life of your family and the future of this country we love. And it will probably be the most important vote you ever cast. And this election is more than just a choice between two parties and two different candidates. It is a choice about whether we have a country rooted in freedom for every American or ruled by chaos and division.
So we'll go more into her speech in depth later in the program. But now let's contrast it to A Night at the Garden. Before we show snippets from the rally at Madison Square Garden, I want people to understand the historic context of this rally. This rally is a conscious attempt to allude to a previous rally that took place in Madison Square Garden during World War II. There's a documentary about it called A Night at the Garden. And I'd like to just show you, if I may, a few minutes from that documentary.
I pledge undivided allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Ladies and gentlemen, fellow Americans, American patriots, I'm sure I do not come before you tonight as a complete stranger. You all have heard of me through the Jewish-controlled press as a creature with horns, a cloven hoof, and a long tail. We, with American ideals, demand that our government shall be returned to the American people who founded it.
If you ask what we are actively fighting for under our charter, first, a social just white Gentile ruled United States. Second, Gentile-controlled labor union, free from Jewish Moscow-directed domination.
So that person who stormed the stage was a Jewish plumber from Brooklyn who wanted to disrupt the Hitler rally. And as you can see, they beat the crap out of him. Donald Trump used to say when someone would, dissent at his rallies, we used to take him out on a stretcher. That guy got taken out on a stretcher.
It's so eerie is that George Washington painting to make him into the American Führer. It's
yeah
right.
It's interesting that they appropriate the American symbols, right? The flag, the eagle, but there's something martial about it. There's some toxically masculinization, right, of these American symbols. So instead of George Washington being benevolent, he's this towering dictator, and there was these sort of Nazi symbols on either side of him. You couldn't see, if you go and look at, there's Nazi flags on either side of him. And it's interesting because that aesthetic still seems to hold. Like when Elon Musk took over Twitter, right? Remember Twitter? Remember the nice little blue birdie?
Yeah.
Right. And now it's X. It's like the insignia on a Nazi uniform, like those, like the SS. It's got this weird kind of Nazi aesthetic, this black and white martial kind of. So it is just kind of interesting from an aesthetic point of view to point that out. But this is the historic reference he is making. And give it to the Democrats. They're pointing that out. Look at what the Democrats projected onto Madison Square Garden. They projected onto Madison Square Garden. For those of you who can't see it, Trump praised Hitler in big letters is projected onto Madison Square Garden.
No, they're on it.
They're on it. And this being New York, here's what else was projected. Someone took out an ad. There's a big billboard on the top of Madison Square Garden, if you've ever been there going to Penn Station. And if those of you who are just listening, it's a giant sign that looks like a Trump. It looks like a Trump sign, but then there's a middle finger in the beginning and it says, fuck Trump. You got to love New York.
You do.
All right. Well, so here there was a cavalcade of racist people, speakers in this talk. I'm not even gonna have a chance to go over all the outrages, but I'd like to introduce you to one person that you probably haven't heard of, Tony Hinchcliffe. Harry, one of the things that I've always talked about is how conservatives don't seem to have a sense of humor. There really aren't any great conservative comedians. There aren't, It seems as if having
there is Bob Hope. Seriously.
Well, okay, well,
it's very rare.
Okay, well, you're reaching pretty far back there. So that tells, if one comes along every few decades, I suppose that could be he or she could be an outlier.
PJ O'Rourke was funny.
Okay,
but you're right. No, you're right. Of course, you're right.
They don't have that capacity for self-reflection, for self-deprecation, for irony. So when I heard that a comedian was speaking at Madison Square Garden, I said, "Uh-oh, are they starting? Are they taking our thing? Are they taking our thing? Humor?" I needn't have worried.
All right. Heck yeah. It's a cool black guy with a thing on his head. What the hell is that? A lampshade? Look at this guy. Oh my goodness. Wow. I'm just kidding. That's one of my buddies. He had a Halloween party last night. We had fun. We carved watermelons together. It was awesome.
Get that? Huh? He's black and we were carving watermelons together. Not funny. Well, anyway, so sometimes, in these TV dramas, they give you a little clue at the beginning and then later you realize the significance that has. Well, remember this man, Tony Hinchcliffe, okay? Because he may be the person personally responsible for electing Kamala Harris. If you want to know why, you're going to have to listen to the rest of the program. But moving on to some of the hate fest at Trump's rally, let's hear what the Jewish Nazi Stephen Miller has to say.
The cartels are gone. The criminal migrants are gone. The gangs are gone. America is for Americans and Americans only. One man. And that man, ladies and gentlemen, that man took a bullet for you. He took a bullet for democracy.
So America for Americans only. There it is, right? Stated as clearly as it could. We don't want any immigrants.
Stephen Miller, who's no doubt his family were immigrants not that many generations ago.
Of course. And they are totally ashamed of him. They've all put out statements about it. Oh, yeah, his family's put out statements, disowning him. What's interesting though, Harry, I noticed that in every ideological movement, no matter whether it's good, bad, right, left, there always seems to be some Jews involved in the intellectual part of the movement, So, and then as Jews, they're always bragging like, Stephen Miller, he's the top Nazi. He's the top Nazi. I tell you, all the other Nazis look up to him. I'm telling you, he tells them all what to do. He's the most famous one. One of our boys made it. Anyway, it's despicable, of course.
No, there's channeling the grandparents of our families.
Exactly. Let's hear the repulsive things that Tucker Carlson has to say about the ethnic background of Kamala Harris.
10 days from now, to look in the eye to America with a straight face, it's going to be pretty hard to look at us and say, you know what, Kamala Harris, she got 85 million votes because she's just so impressive. As the first Samoan, Malaysian, low IQ, former California prosecutor ever to be elected president, it was just a groundswell of popular support. And anyone who thinks otherwise is just a freak or a criminal.
Samoan, Malaysian, low IQ.
I have such contempt for this guy. He's just, like so many of Trump's followers, he's just gotten worse and worse.
Mm-hmm. And so there was more racism. There were anti-Muslim statements, anti-Jewish statements, anti-Latino statements, anti-immigrant statements. We just don't have time to go through them all. But we will get back to one of them later in the program. And I'm not going to give too many of the excerpts from Trump, but here's one where he basically, given that this is a Hitler rally, here he is preaching fascism.
We're running against something far bigger than Joe or Kamala and far more powerful than them, which is a massive, vicious, crooked, radical left machine that runs today's Democrat Party. They're just vessels. In fact, they're perfect vessels because they'll never give them a hard time. They'll do whatever they want. I know many of them. It's just this amorphous group of people. But they're smart and they're vicious. And we have to defeat them. And when I say the enemy from within, the other side goes crazy, becomes a sound. Oh, how can he say? No, they've done very bad things to this country. They are indeed the enemy from within. But this is who we're fighting. These are the people who are doing such harm to our country with their open border policies, record-setting inflation, Green New Scam, and everything else that they're doing.
So, of course, we've heard this enemy from within idea before, but I still thought it was important to play it. And it's interesting, he says it's an amorphous group of people. Yeah. The thing about these enemies from within is they're very vague. They shift daily with the leader's preferences and the leader's likes and dislikes, and people who are on the in and people who are on the outs, people who agreed with him before, but now so this idea, not only of an enemy from within, but that it's shadowy and it's vague and undefined. And so anybody could be the enemy from within.
Exactly. It leaves an opening to punish or persecute whoever he wants.
Exactly.
And that's what fascists like to set up.
Right. And, whether it's the Russian Revolution, the Chinese Revolution, Saddam Hussein, all of these authoritarian movements work in the same way. So he made a couple of policy announcements. One is that Elon Musk is going to be in charge of the budget. And I didn't show this clip because we just didn't have time, but I thought I should inform you that Elon Musk has announced that he's going to slash the budget by a third. Okay, which economists have said would throw the country into a depression, actually, because the government is a significant part of GDP. And he acknowledged in an interview that it would throw us into a recession, but it was worth it because we needed to suffer this economic pain. But of course, all they're trying to do is dismantle the government. They're just trying to gut it like a fish and basically feed off of it. So yeah, they'll cut the government, they'll cut all the Social Security, they'll cut all the programs, and they'll cut taxes on themselves. Okay. And then they'll just use the government as a piggy bank to give themselves, sweetheart contracts and deals. So with Elon Musk's motivation.
Right. With Bitcoin and that kind of thing.
Exactly.
And don't forget the Freedom Caucus in the House was trying to destroy the process of government so that a strong man, Trump could come in and say,
right.
Well, look, this isn't working.
Right. So this is really about burning government to the ground.
Absolutely.
Right? It is. And like the way a fire can spread very quickly, they're making it clear that they're going to do this very quickly, right? On day one, right, they're going to round up all the immigrants. On day one, they're going to slash the budget. And guess who's going to be in charge of health and human services?
And we also have somebody that is great. And look, we're not going to let him go too crazy, Elon, with the oil and gas stuff. And, because Robert F. Kennedy cares more about human beings and health and the environment than anybody. And he's going to be absolutely, having him is such a great honor. I've been friends of his for a long time. And I'm going to let him go wild on health. I'm going to let him go wild on the food. I'm going to let him go wild on medicines. The only thing I don't think I'm going to let him even get near is the liquid gold that we have under our feet. I don't know, Elon, he might not like liquid gold. It's oil and gas, sometimes referred to as oil and gas. JD, I think we're going to have to keep him away from the oil and gas. What do you think, Howard? Yes? But where is Robert? He's around. He gave a beautiful speech. He's a great guy. He truly cares. I mean, he truly cares about this, and it's an honor.
Sometimes referred to as oil and gas. Did that make any sense to you?
No, it didn't make sense. He went back and forth between talking about Elon Musk and talking about Robert Kennedy, talking about energy, talking about health and human services. But look, Robert Kennedy is what we used to call a kook. Right? He's an anti-vaxxer. He's completely nuts. And we're just going to let him go wild with medicines and go wild with food and just go wild with the environment. I mean, talk about a description of a chaos presidency, right? Mm-hmm. We thought we saw chaos before, right? We ain't seen nothing yet. And I hope we never do, obviously. But right. This even just the way they're talking about, we're just going to slash the government. We're going to put the nut in charge of everything and let them go wild. It's this recipe for chaos.
Now, of course, there's chaos always with Trump, so that he now has someone who's heading up the transition team. And that person said that Kennedy would not be the head of Health and Human Services.
Okay.
But said he would have an impact on policy. So it's all this. And you can't really slash the budget without congressional approval, right? But Trump can put 30, 40, 50% tariffs on other countries without congressional approval. And that will crash the economy right away.
Absolutely. All the economists say that. There's just no question about it. It's a huge drag on the economy. So basically what we're talking about is really the most incompetent and the worst people would be running the government. It would be a kind of a macabre, dark shadow of a government. People who are really there to destroy it, not to
malevolent clown show.
Yeah, exactly. A government that's really malevolent towards towards the country and towards the people. Well, Harry, you're probably not doing well if you have to say, I'm not Hitler. If your closing argument is I'm not Hitler, you're losing. Well, let's hear what Donald Trump has to say about not being Hitler.
Many years ago, I had a father who was a great guy. He was a strong guy, a legitimate guy, strong. But he always used to tell me, never use the word Nazi and never use the word Hitler. Now we're called Nazis. And I'm called Hitler. I'm not Hitler. Boy, my father, he's looking.
I'm not Hitler.
But notice, my father was a strong man, a legitimate man. What does that mean? A strong man, legitimate, strong man. And he said, never use the word Nazi. So here he is, using the word Nazi and Hitler in a sentence. It's you're right. I mean, if you have to say it, you're not doing well.
But here's the thing. Here's a great video about his being very similar to Hitler, because the Alien and Sedition Act is what he's claiming he's going to invoke. And here's a little video that tells us something about the history of how the Alien and Sedition Act has been used.
In 1942, America invoked the Alien Enemies Act and imprisoned thousands of innocent people in camps like this. Sound familiar?
And I will invoke the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. Think of that. To hunt down, arrest, and deport every last illegal alien gang member until there is not a single one left in this country.
We've been here before. If you stay home, it happens again. Vote November 5th, paid for by Turn Left PAC.
Okay, Trump
Great.
is Hitler. Okay, and fuck you if you don't want to admit it, because we're on the verge of this election. We're on the verge of potentially electing the American Hitler. I don't think we will, but I think that we will. We're really having a near miss, okay, with total destruction.
You know, every time I actually see photographs of this kind of demonizing and denigrating other people, like I don't mean to sound like a bleeding heart liberal, although I kind of am. But I just hadn't seen pictures of the Japanese internment camps in a long time.
Yeah.
And when I see it, when I see Bosnians, pictures of Bosnians in concentration camps, it just goes right to my gut. Like I have such a visceral response. And it's a kind of helpless rage. Like, how could this have happened? And here we have a criminal running for president, a convicted criminal running for president, saying on day one, he's going to have mass deportations of millions of people, knocking on doors. And what if the child is American, but the parents are illegal? Then what happens? We know.
Yeah, then I guess you separate the parents from the child, right?
Well, yeah.
What a lot of people don't realize is, first of all, concentration camps are not the same as death camps. So any camp that tries to concentrate an undesirable population in a camp is a concentration camp. Those Japanese internment camps were concentration
camps, of course.
Okay. And when Trump was president, he built out concentration camps in the desert to hold 250,000 people, and he was going to fill them up. But the child separation policy created so much flack that he actually, for once, backed down on something. But you better believe 100% that he will fill up those concentration camps if he is elected. And so, yes, he is the American Hitler wannabe.
Now, the important difference is that Hitler's Germany was ready to submit to Hitler. I mean, the country was really behind it. If Trump is elected and tries these things, I'm not saying that he won't succeed, but there will be a resistance institutionally, politically. He's going to have half the country against him. But the idea that someone is even threatening to do this stuff and could get away with some of it, if not all of it eventually, is something we have to consider. We have to remember history because it's happened before.
Right.
Many times.
Yeah. What is it about never again that people don't understand? I don't get it.
No, me neither.
Now, remember that comedian, Harry, that we were talking about?
Yeah.
And how I said he might actually be personally responsible for electing Kamala Harris?
Yeah.
Let me, and I told you I would tell you later why. Well, let's see one of the really funny jokes from his set.
It is absolutely wild times. It really, really is. And, there's a lot going on. Like, I don't know if you guys know this, but there's literally a floating island of garbage in the middle of the ocean right now. Yeah. I think it's called Puerto Rico. Okay. All right. Okay. We're getting there.
What's so interesting about this is, we've become so desensitized to all of the racist comments they make, right? And they never seem to pay any penalty for it. You know what I mean? You can call Mexicans rapists. You can have a Muslim ban. You can say people are coming from shithole countries. You can say Haitians are eating cats and dogs. They just never seem to pay any price. So you just kind of get used to the fact that, oh, well, I guess it's okay to say racist stuff now and nobody cares.
Sure.
Well, guess what? Turns out the Puerto Ricans care. This has spread like wildfire.
Absolutely.
Like wildfire through the Puerto Rican community. And it has produced a seismic reaction. First of all, a massive number of celebrities have come out immediately against Trump after this incident. Let's take a look at some of those endorsements. So now I have to admit, Harry, I have never heard of Bad Bunny. But apparently Bad Bunny is one of the most famous Puerto Rican musicians in the country, in the world. And he has 45 million followers. He immediately endorsed Kamala 5 minutes after this speech. But also Ariana Grande came out for Kamala. J-Lo came out for Kamala. Ricky Martin came out for Kamala. Luis Fonsi, I don't know, he came out for Kamala. And so here's Victor Shi. He's a tweeter. He says that's a combine of 676 million followers among all those accounts put together. That is huge, massive. So all of these influencers with tens and hundreds of millions of followers started tweeting and posting against Donald Trump when this came out.
And now the next morning, I saw interviewed two Latino radio talk show hosts being interviewed by CNN. And this one guy who said that the week before the calls were half and half Trump, Kamala, that morning they all shifted. They all renounced Trump. And that morning, Trump scheduled a press opportunity at Mar-a-Lago. And Jim Acosta, I don't know if you guys know him. He's on CNN. He used to be a White House correspondent. And with a lot of the shuffling that went on and trying to make CNN more diverse, he basically has the morning hours on CNN, always a favorite of mine. And when he announced this opportunity, he looked at the camera and said, and people were saying Trump was going to apologize. And he said, Trump is not going to apologize. He's going to go on and on about how great he is, and he won't take any questions. And that's exactly what happened. And I think his staff wanted him to say something about it. Because now, John, how many Puerto Rican people are in Pennsylvania?
Well, I was going to get to that later, but since you hinted at it, that's all right. You're ruining my suspense. 500,000. 500,000 with an M. Okay. We're talking about an election that'll be won by 20,000 votes in Pennsylvania or 80,000 votes in Pennsylvania. Okay. And here's the thing. They've really, I'm glad you mentioned that thing about the radio show host, right? Mm-hmm. Latino voters have really been true swing voters. They really have swung back and forth. And one of the things that has been frightening Democrats is recently they've been drifting towards Trump. They have, especially Latino men. Because in general, as we're going to talk about with our guest, Stephen Ducat, there is a tendency for men to be attracted to the machismo of Trump and women to be more attracted to Kamala. We have the biggest gender gap in history. So especially Latino men who were beginning to drift towards him, when they got wind of this insult, they changed their vote. Okay. They said, fuck him. Okay. I'm not voting for him anymore. I'm going to punish him and vote for the other person. So it's not just a change of one vote. Really, it's two votes, right? Because we're subtracting one vote for Trump and we're adding a vote for Kamala.
And I told this to John. I've been working with a physical trainer the last couple of years at my local gym, and she is, all of 29. And she's from Brooklyn, and her father is Puerto Rican and her mother is Jewish. And although she identifies, I think, more as Latina. And my joke to her was, if Trump wins, everyone's going to go after her because she's both of them, right? She's Puerto Rican and she's Jewish. But she said to me that on social media, on Latin social media, it was blowing up. It wasn't the radio. It was everything. TikTok, Instagram. It's been a real scandal. And John and I were talking about this. This may be the October surprise.
something that no one could have predicted. I mean, or could have orchestrated. Now, here's a Puerto Rican celebrity. Again, I'm sorry, I don't know of him, but his name is Mark Anthony. He's also a famous singer.
Oh yeah.
Okay,
he's big.
He's big. Okay, and here's a video that he made and put out on social media to his 10 or 20 million followers.
This is Mark Anthony. Even though some have forgotten, I remember what it was like when Trump was president. I remember what he did and he said about Puerto Rico, about our people.
Puerto Rico.
I remember after Hurricane Maria devastated our island, Trump blocked billions in relief while thousands died. I remember when our families lacked clean water and electricity, Trump threw paper towels and called Puerto Rico dirty and poor. I was not surprised, because I also remember that he launched his campaign by calling Latinos criminals and rapists. He told us what he'll do. He'll separate children from their families and threaten to use the army to do it. This election goes way beyond political parties. Let's remember what the United States represents and stands for. United, regardless of where we're from. I am Mark Anthony and I remember. That's why I support Kamala Harris for president.
I'm Kamala Harris and I approve this message.
Wow. They're on it. I mean, they're talking about a flawless campaign. Kamala Harris churned out that ad like the next day.
And by the way, he's got to be like the coolest guy on the planet.
He seemed cool.
Oh yeah, Jesus Christ! Start listening to his music again.
So, and I think this is really important what we're saying here, because we've so been used to an underreaction, right? I mean, like, the Haitians were insulted. Well, what are they going to do about it, right? No one's saying the election's going to change because the Haitians are mad, right? Well, people have really underestimated the dignity and the pride and the sort of alertness of the Puerto Rican community, that they get it, they heard it, and they are a community. They are organized, and so this got passed around, on social media, by people on radio and TV, and also just passed around by friends and people in the community. So here was a headline saying something about how this has hit Pennsylvania. Trump's Puerto Rico fallout is, quote, spreading like wildfire in Pennsylvania. Evidence of the backlash was immediate on Monday. And actually, I didn't want to torture poor Rex with another slide, so I'm just going to read this one. I printed it out. But from that article, I just want to let you know that Robert L. Lugo, president of the Pennsylvania chapter of the National Puerto Rican Agenda, said the nonpartisan group will be releasing a letter shared exclusively with Politico, condemning the comments and urging Pennsylvania Puerto Ricans not to vote for Trump. He's sending a letter to every Puerto Rican in Pennsylvania who's a member of his organization or on his mailing list, telling them he's organizing a campaign among Pennsylvania Puerto Ricans to not vote for Donald Trump, subsequent to this one remark by this one obscure failed comedian.
Well, and to make matters worse, that comedian also went on to make horrible jokes about Latinos, breeding babies because they don't want to pull out, and they won't pull out of our country. It was it was vile. If you listen to it, of course, it's going to make them angry. And by the way, about the Haitians, just as a postscript, you remember Trump said he was going to go to that town in Ohio. Was Springfield, Ohio?
Mm-hmm.
Never went.
They didn't want him. The white people in Springfield didn't want him. And the black people certainly didn't. So let's see. Let's just see a little bit more about some of the ads that are coming out about this issue. Here's another ad from the Kamala Harris campaign.
A floating island of garbage in the middle of the ocean. I think it's called Puerto Rico.
Puerto Rico.
I will never forget what Donald Trump did. He abandoned the island and offered nothing more than paper towels and insults. Puerto Ricans deserve better. As president, I will always fight for you and your families. And together, we can chart a new way forward.
I'm Kamala Harris, and I approve this message.
No, it's the same ad, and it's equally effective.
And I'm going to show you one more ad from the Lincoln Project.
We are Puerto Ricans, and we are Americans. But Donald Trump doesn't see us that way. We remember what he did to us after Hurricane Maria. We were dying by the thousands while he threw paper towels at us like we were a joke. Because he thinks we are garbage.
I don't know if you guys know this, but there's literally a floating island of garbage in the middle of the ocean right now. Yeah, I think it's called Puerto Rico.
We are not your punchline. We know who we are. We are proud Americans, proud Puerto Ricans. And we see who you are. You are racist. You are a liar. You are the one that is garbage. And we know where real garbage belongs. In the trash.
Powerful. We know where real garbage belongs.
No one's pulling any punches there.
Right. Exactly. Well, I just wanted to end the part about the Hitler rally by just giving Walz and Obama a chance to comment on it. So first, let's hear from Tim Walz.
Donald Trump has descended into madness over the last few weeks. And I think some of you don't miss on this. Go do your Google on this. Donald Trump's got this big rally going at Madison Square Garden. There's a direct parallel to a big rally that happened in the mid-1930s at Madison Square Garden. And don't think that he doesn't know for 1 second exactly what they're doing there.
So again, they're going there. They're calling attention to the direct reference that he's creating with this rally.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, I'm going to give Obama the last word.
We saw it last night. I know nobody's going to boo now. All you're going to do is vote. Hold on a second. So the man holds this big rally at Madison Square Garden. And the warm-up speakers were saying the most, we're trotting out and peddling the most racist, sexist, bigoted stereotypes. One guy called Puerto Rico, quote, an island of garbage. Now, these are fellow citizens he's talking about. Here in Philadelphia, they are your neighbors. They are your friends. They are your co-workers. Their kids go to school with your kids. These are Americans. They're people. And that is the reason why this election should not be close. It should be clear. Here's a good rule. If somebody does not respect you, if somebody does not see you as fellow citizens with equal claims to opportunity, to the pursuit of happiness, to the American dream, you should not vote for them. You should not expect them to make your life better. They will not help you make the, they will not help you pay the bills. They're not gonna work hard to make sure your kid gets a good education. They're not gonna help you with a down payment on a house. I mean, we have to reject the kind of politics of division and hatred that we saw represented. America's ready to turn the page. America's ready for a better story. Philadelphia, we are ready for a president, Kamala Harris.
Are you ready to turn the page, Harry? I am. Crazy. Well, it was good to hear him.
No,
say
he's
that forcefully.
He's just so great.
Yeah.
You know, he has a charisma that doesn't resemble anybody else's.
It's true.
You know, there was a Charles Krauthammer, the psychiatrist turned conservative columnist, once said something so insightful, I've never forgotten it, which was, he said, when Clinton gives a speech, he wants the audience to love him. He says, when Obama gives a speech, the audience wants Obama to love them.
That's cute. So look, the next sequence is, we've been talking about metrics, right? And one of the themes that I've been going through is that the metrics that I'm looking at seem to be more optimistic than the top line numbers that we're getting from the press. Now, look, this is the last episode before the election. I mean, it couldn't be more dramatic. It simply couldn't be. Really, the fate of our country, the fate of humanity will be decided by is on a knife's edge and will be decided in a matter of hours. So these metrics that we're going to look at today are obviously very, very important. The beauty of the metrics we're looking at today, Harry, is we're going to be looking at votes.
Right.
Not poll numbers. Okay. Actual votes. This is real data. It's not data about data. It's data. Now, obviously, the fact that it's early votes, you know, there's all these shifting winds and trends, right? We don't know who's going to vote early, who's going to vote late. Yes, and we really can't use the 2020 election as a model because that was during COVID, you know, so all the Democrats basically voted by mail and most of the Republicans showed up in person. But since then, Republicans have been urging their partisans to vote early. People get it now. I mean, you can vote by mail, you can vote early, you can vote on election day. I think everybody sort of gets that. So it's hard to know how the electorate is going to change as more votes come in. But what we do know, we know what we do know. We know what data has come in. So first, I'm gonna look at all 8 swing states, okay? And we're going to look at them twice. Once, we're going to look at the early votes by party. And next, we're going to look at the early votes by gender. So first, let's look at the early votes by party. So we're going to start with Nevada. And basically, just to give you a hint, I'm kind of going from bad news to good news.
Okay.
In Nevada, it doesn't look too good. Right now, Republicans are outvoting Democrats 40% to 35%. So, and there's 25% who are not affiliated.
Well, that's very interesting.
It is, because independents seem to be breaking towards Kamala, I think plus 16%, something like that in one poll.
Between 10 and 16.
So one of the things to look at in these early voting numbers is how large the independent group is, because it varies a lot from state to state. But anyway, here the Republicans, as far as you know, are ahead. Let's look at the next state. Let's go to Arizona. Arizona, not that much better. 42% of Republicans have voted, 35% of Democrats, 23% are independent. So right now, it looks like we're behind in Arizona. Now let's look at Georgia. Okay, so in Georgia, much, much closer, but we're still behind. Republicans, 48%, Democrats, 45%, and only a 7% independent. So not a lot of give there.
But that could make it tied.
Yes, yes.
Right.
We should call Georgia sort of really right on the edge, tied. And even more tied is North Carolina. So 33% Democrats, 34% Republicans, 33% other. So basically it's divided into thirds almost as perfectly mathematically as you could do it. It's a third, and a third.
I've really been hopeful about North Carolina for Harris. I really have been for some time now.
Now, one thing I want to tell all of you who may be getting nervous at this point is we don't need to win any of the states that I've just talked about. We can lose them all and win the election. But we do have to win the 3 northern blue wall states. And with those northern blue wall states, we have enough electoral votes to win. Let's look at Michigan. Oh, 48% of the voters are Democrats, 41% Republican, and 11% independent. So still somewhat close, but we're ahead. Let's look at Wisconsin.
Huge.
Huge. 36% Democrats, 23% Republicans, and 41% independents. So those numbers so far, if they hold, would look like a romp for us. Now let's look at the final one when everyone's worried about, Pennsylvania. 59% of the votes are Democrats, 31% are Republican, and 10% are independent. Now, even if, and it probably will happen, that more Republican voters will come in on election day, we're building up a firewall of hundreds of thousands of votes. We're banking a lead of hundreds of thousands of votes. So that's just the first set of the first cut that I wanted to look at, is of the people who have actually voted. How are they voting, or what party are they that are actually voting? Obviously, we don't know
what registration, right?
Yeah, what registration. Now, here's the thing. I believe that one of the most important variables is gender. That the election may really come down to men versus women. Sort of toxic masculinity versus femininity, and all of its positive attributes. Look at this Politico cover. Democrats see signs for optimism in gender gap in early vote. Across battlegrounds, there is a 10-point gender gap in early voting so far, according to Politico. So there's really two aspects to this gender gap issue. One is obviously that men and women are more polarized than they've ever been. There's something like 33 points between men and women.
Oh, yeah, it's the worst.
Now, up until now, most of the polling I've seen, the gender gap is such that women are more against Trump than men are for him. In other words, there's a gap, but if you put them together, it ends up being plus 3 or 4% for Kamala. Now, recently, we've had polling that's brought them closer. That's scaring people, that it might only be as little as 1% difference, a 1% profit, let's say. If all the men and all the women voted and it was 50-50, the women are 1% more in favor of Kamala than the men are in favor of Trump. And now today we had one poll in the New York Times that actually had it the opposite, that it was -1. It was 1 in favor of the men for Trump, and they had 1 point more for Trump.
This is the New York Times Siena polls.
The New York Times Siena poll, which has always seemed like propagandistic or tilting right. The overall trend has been that women like Kamala more than men like Trump. But we also have to admit that men have been drifting towards Trump, right? And he appeals to them. So I don't want to make too much of that difference, because it's a soft difference. We really don't know how much women prefer Kamala compared to Trump, or even if they do, for sure. But here's something we do know. They do prefer Kamala, and men do prefer Trump. So the team who most of their players show up is the one who's going to win. If more women vote, we survive. If more men vote, we die. It's that simple. Now, traditionally, women do vote more often. Traditionally, they're like 53% of the electorate. So men would be 47%. So like a 6-point spread.
Already. They vote more.
Right. Well, that's what we're talking about. When I say, that's what I'm saying. When they're 53% of the electorate, I'm saying they're voting more often, because they're more than half of the electorate. They're more than half of the people voting. Sorry, not the electorate, the voters.
Yeah, there's more women than men, and they vote more often than men do.
Exactly. Let's look at this Newsweek cover. Quote, huge advantage for Harris in early voting data, U.S. polling, quote, Nostradamus says. Let's see that quote. So I don't know how many of you know Alan Lichtman.
Oh, yeah.
He's a political scientist who brags that he has correctly predicted 10 out of the last 11 presidential elections using his statistical model. And even the one he got wrong there's kind of an asterisk there. I forget if it was the Gore election or the Trump election where there was some hanky-panky. But he had to say, on Tuesday, Lichtman said gender could be more indicative of who is winning in early voting than party registration. Quote, "We know there is an enormous gender gap in every state with double-digit gender gap on both sides. And so I think the most indicative statistic of how the early vote going is gender."
And Ron Brownstein, the great pollster and strategist who I've been following since the late 80s, who, by the way, coined the term blue wall, by the way. He says what he's going to be looking at is the gender difference. Like that's the numbers he wants to see on election night.
Well, let's look at some of the numbers that have already come in among the voters. We're going to go through those 8 states again in the same order. All right. Let's look at Nevada. Oh, in Nevada, it's equal among the genders. 45% men have voted and 45% women, and only 10% are independents. Oh, I'm sorry. Actually, 10 have not specified their gender. I guess that's what it is. We're not talking about party registration. Okay. But so as far as we know, exactly equal. And Nevada is the state where we're losing. Now let's look at Arizona. Oh, okay. Slight gender gap in our favor, 48% to 44%, but still less than the normal gender gap. And we're losing in Arizona so far.
Very close.
Now let's look at Georgia. Wow.
Wow is right. Look at that.
Look at that. 56% of the voters are women and 44% are men. That's a huge gap. That's 12 points, 12%. So even though Georgia looks like it's on the bubble, looking at these numbers might make you think that we have a much better chance in Georgia than the party numbers would have suggested. Now, let's look at North Carolina. Again, big gap.
Huge.
Historic gap, 55% to 44%. Now, we don't know if these numbers are going to hold up. We have to be honest, right? Because not only do women vote more, but they're also more organized and responsible. So they also may vote earlier. You know, they may have their shit together in a way where they're organized enough to actually vote. So we don't know that these are going to be the final numbers. But if these were the final numbers, we would win handily. Now, let's go to the blue wall. Michigan. Look at this discrepancy. 56% of the voters are women, 44% are men, a 12% gap. Now let's look at Wisconsin. 51% women, 43% men. Again, big gender gap. And finally, let's look at Pennsylvania. 56% women and 43% men, a 13% gender gap, double the normal gender gap in voting in voting behavior. So,
and let me just add something.
Yeah.
You know, we're looking at party registration and then gender. What about the Republican women who are actually voting for Harris because of the abortion issue and aren't telling anybody? I mean, that could account for this huge amount of women voting, whereas the party registration looks tied, right? But with women coming out to vote, just because you're registered Republican doesn't mean you're voting for Trump.
Right. We know for a statistical fact that more women are voting for Kamala more than they're voting for Trump. So the more women who show up, the better. And we don't know individually which Republican women are going to vote for Trump and which are going to vote for Kamala, but we know women are our constituency.
Which makes the registration stats a little bit deceptive.
That's right. A little less important, especially when you have all those independents.
That's what you're demonstrating. Right.
Now, one of the things the press has picked up on, by the way, which is, you know, again, to scare the Democrats is, well, more Republicans are voting early now than voted early in 2020. And that's true. Now, it's possible that could reflect voter enthusiasm. And if that's the case, and maybe it is partially the case, then that would be a negative for us. But also, it's not COVID anymore, right? It's a very, I think, could be misleading to focus on the fact that more Republicans have voted early than have voted early before, because they're not against early voting anymore. They used to be against it.
And Trump told them it was bad in 2020.
Yeah. Right. So I don't know that you can really, that's a confounded variable. So I really don't think that, and yet that's the one the press has picked up on.
Well,
I
yeah,
really had to search.
Because it makes it more of a horse.
Because it makes it more of a horse race. I showed you these two articles about the gender effect. It wasn't that easy to find those articles. I mean, I was doing this research for a week. I almost took this out of the story because I thought, well, am I just making this up? I mean, is this wrong? And then I finally said, no, this is a real thing. But yet it's not what we're hearing about, on the news. All right, well, let's look at another metric. Speaking about real voting, let's look at a poll, but it's a poll of people who have voted, asking them who they voted for in the blue wall states. Let's see that graphic. Oh, well, of the people who have actually voted in Michigan, 61% voted for Kamala and 35% have voted for Trump. In Wisconsin, 60% have voted for Kamala and 38% have voted for Trump. And in Pennsylvania, 57% have voted for Kamala and 40% have voted for Trump. Now, obviously, these numbers are probably going to tighten up.
Oh, yeah. Of course they will.
But how is it in the polls, they're 1 point apart, but among people who have actually voted, they're like 25 points apart? How is that possible? I mean, that's like a 2,000% difference between the estimates and what's actually happening.
Well, it could be that men are not voting early.
That could be.
There's so many ways of running this down, but it is positive to see her banking votes for sure.
Right.
Let's just put it that way. It's positive.
The other people who don't vote early are young people, by the way, who are like 70-30 for us. And so one of the things that Kamala is doing is trying to activate that young person base. She just had an amazing rally in Madison, Wisconsin, which, as you know, is the home of the University of Wisconsin, which has like something like 100,000 students or something crazy number like that. These are the people we need to activate, right?
Well, I thought maybe we could just talk for 1 second about the ground game, because people keep saying that if it's tied, the race goes to the person with the better ground game. And my dear friend John has been sort of poo-pooing canvassing, saying I've done it and I haven't seen much. And I understand the old-fashioned knock on a door and change minds. But let me tell you what someone I know told me who has canvassed twice in Pennsylvania. The first time she canvassed for Harris in Pennsylvania, she had an app on her phone. And every house that she went to and spoke to people, she would mark down on this very complicated app, which included the demographic information. Were they voting Democratic? Were they voting Republican? Were they undecided yet? And all that information went back to the campaign to then tailor the ads to each community, depending on what the stats they were seeing. And then the next time they went down, more recently, they went down to talk to the people who said they were going to vote for Harris, asking them if they had a plan for voting and did they need any help getting to the polls. And they also went down talking to people who are still undecided and then asking if they can turn them. This kind of ground game, if it's done massively in the swing states, could make all the difference.
Well, I'll tell you where I would agree with you that the ground game can make a difference: with students. If a stranger knocks on your suburban door, in my view, you're not going to really get anywhere. But if somebody knocks on your dorm door, some cute girl from upstairs knocks on your door and says, "Hey, have you voted yet?" You don't want to disappoint her.
Well, that's true. But what I'm saying, I think this notion that people are canvassing and getting demographic information about each community by county, which means you can target those areas to get the vote out. John, I'm sorry, this is modern political, vote getting. It's very important.
Yeah, well, I'm still going to be a little skeptical. I've used those apps when wandering through neighborhoods in Philadelphia, and I don't think I accomplished a damn thing. But anyway, that's okay. So look, remember, we're trying to have some dramatic suspense here. Remember, I said that obscure racist comedian could be the man who saved the world. He may have saved the world. And we may look back on this election a week from now and say, that's not a crazy statement. Heathcliff, whatever his name is, saved the world.
Henchworth, whatever his name.
Henchworth, yeah. May his name be cursed, whatever it is.
No, may it be blessed.
May it be blessed, that's right, because that racist may have saved the world. Okay, you kind of blew my suspenseful ending, but let's look at the breakdown of Puerto Ricans in swing states. Okay, so here's a map here, right? And let's first go to Pennsylvania. We've already talked about it. It says 472,000. Some people are just calling it 500,000, 500,000. Actually, that's the third biggest population of Puerto Ricans in America. Florida is first, New York is second, and Pennsylvania is third. Now, of the blue wall states, Pennsylvania is the one that people are the most worried about, the one that they feel might be the closest. And that really could be, the election. Who wins Pennsylvania probably will win the election.
Mm-hmm.
So when you realize that these elections are, and by the way, let's just look at some of these other states, and then we're going to take the graphic off. Michigan has 43,000. Wisconsin has 61,000. Arizona has 64,000. Georgia has 100,000, and North Carolina has 115,000.
No, I mean that's why I think Georgia and North Carolina may be up for grabs now because of that comedian.
Yeah. And here's the thing. Think about these numbers. We can take the graphic off now, but think about these numbers. All right. What we just showed is this community is organized. They're in tune. They're in touch. They're in communication with each other. Okay. So the Politico headline was it's spreading like wildfire in Pennsylvania. Okay. 500,000 people. Let's just do the math. Let's say that changed. I'm going to be super, super conservative here. Let's say that changed 1 out of 10 votes. I mean, that's super conservative, right? That would be 50,000 votes, right? But if it changed these votes from Trump, it's actually 100,000 vote swing, right? So even if only 1 out of 10 Pennsylvania Puerto Ricans change their vote, that's 100,000 votes. Okay, that's how much Biden won Pennsylvania by.
And I don't think it's 1%.
No, 10%. No, I think it'll be more than 10%. Absolutely. That's why I said, even if I'm ultra conservative, if I pick a number that you just can't even argue with, at least that many, right, are going to respond.
No, it's absolutely. It's pretty incredible. And I think they're done with polling. Like, we're not going to see the impact of Madison Square Garden on the numbers in Pennsylvania before the election. So it's mysterious. We'll have to see. Well,
we know how the Puerto Rican comment affected at least one voter's vote. Here is a TikTok from an anonymous, he's not anonymous, but just a citizen, just put on TikTok. He wanted Donald Trump to know he was changing his vote.
I was going to vote for you, but I'm Puerto Rican. I have decency. I have self-respect. So after you make comments, your campaign made comments against us, against the Puerto Rican people, you forgot that we have the right to vote. And we have 500,000 people in Pennsylvania. We have more than 1 million people in Florida. And we have something that you don't know. We have dignity and self-respect. So now we're going to cast the vote against you. You're going to be punished. You have to be punished. You forgot that we took away a governor of Puerto Rico for insulting the people of Puerto Rico. So now my vote is for Kamala.
You have to be punished.
Absolutely. I love it.
No, and it's like, you keep wondering why people didn't react this way sooner, right? I mean, and yet you rightfully called this the October surprise. This may be the election.
I think so too. And It's funny. I've been to Puerto Rico a couple of times, and I certainly grew up with people who are Puerto Rican, and it's such a proud culture. It's a
Yes.
beautiful culture, and it's every Spanish dialect is different, but the Puerto Rican Spanish is fast. You know what I mean? It's just a wonderful thing, and I think. I don't know why there isn't the same kind of response among Latinos of Chicanos from Mexico and other places, but boy, don't mess with Puerto Rico, man. You never mess with Puerto Rico.
Don't mess with Puerto Rico.
Oh,
That's the takeaway.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Well, getting back to our bad news, good news sequence, you might recall that last week we reported on the LA Times, the owner of the LA Times, spiking their editorial endorsing Kamala Harris, and that this created a huge hue and cry, and rightfully so. And this feeling that we're losing independent journalism, that it's under the control of the billionaire owners. So actually, we've gotten some further information about the LA Times. Let's see that headline. It turns out that it was more than the editorial that he kiboshed. LA Times planned a whole case against Trump series alongside the Kamala Harris endorsement before the owner quashed it. Patrick Soon-Shiong's interference with the paper's editorial freedom has sparked a crisis that includes canceled subscriptions and several high-profile resignations. So here's the problem with these billionaire businessmen buying up all these media properties. In some cases, they're just plain old corrupt, and they're on the Russian team. Elon Musk and Vladimir Putin are working for the same goals to elect Donald Trump. So they're just clear. It's been purchased, and now it's an organ of propaganda. We've seen this over and over again.
It's treason, by the way.
Thank you. It is treason. Exactly. But, with these billionaire owners, they are thinking like business, even the ones that are not ideologically bent towards Trump, right? As businessmen, they know if he is elected, he will punish them if they have allowed their papers to come out against him. And these are people who own for-profit businesses. Okay. And we know he'll do it, right? He's already threatening to take away CBS's license because they interviewed Kamala Harris on 60 Minutes. Doesn't even make sense. With Jeff Bezos, he was threatening to jack up the mail prices for Amazon deliveries, trying to find some way to punish Jeff Bezos.
Wait, you mean Jeff Bezos? You mean the Amazon guy who also owns the Washington Post?
Yeah, that guy. We're going to get to him in a minute. But the other thing is, so if you go against him, right, your business is going to be punished. But if you go for him or you help him in some way, then you might get some patronage. So let's see what that billionaire is up to at the LA Times. Oh, biotech billionaire is in talks with Trump about a senior healthcare role, sources say. Oh, so if you can't beat the Nazis, you join them. Why not? Makes sense, right? This is, when they say when the Nazi takeover, right? It's not just that the true believers and the adherents. It's the people who just do nothing, right? Who sort of surrender to power in advance. Well, speaking about the Washington Post, as you probably now also know, Jeff Bezos did the same thing at the Washington Post. He spiked their editorial in which they were going to endorse Kamala Harris. It's the first time in something like 50 years that the Washington Post hasn't endorsed someone. And to say there was a firestorm, it doesn't even cover it. Members of the board of directors resigned. Senior editors resigned. Columnists resigned. 250,000 people canceled their subscriptions. It may be going higher than that. All of the columnists wrote a joint letter signed by virtually all of them protesting. We also have this tweet by Marty Baron, the former editor of the Washington Post, on political endorsements. This is cowardice with democracy as its casualty. Donald Trump will see this as an invitation to further intimidate owner Jeff Bezos and others, disturbing spinelessness at an institution famed for courage. So they're not pulling any punches. But as we say, Jeff Bezos is a businessman, and he's been worried about Donald Trump punishing his business. Oh, and let's see what else Bezos has been up to. Trump meets with leaders from Bezos-owned Blue Origin. Former President Trump met with leaders from the Jeff Bezos-owned aerospace company Blue Origin following his speech in Austin, Texas. The former president's meeting came on the same day as it was reported that the Washington Post would not be endorsing a presidential candidate in the 2024 election. The outlet reported Friday that Bezos, the paper's billionaire owner, himself made the decision to yank the endorsement of Trump's rival, Vice President Harris, which the news outlet's editorial board already prepared. So, looks like it's a business opportunity for him. This is the problem with, corporate ownership of the media. Now, that's the bad news. That's the corrupt news. I will say, Harry, that after 8 years of trying to get this story into the newspaper, we have some good news 3 days before the election. Let's look at the Las Vegas Sun. Actually, Harry, maybe you could read this one for us.
I'd be happy to. Oh, wow. Look at that. Donald Trump's cognitive decline becoming a troubling concern. Americans from both sides of the political spectrum should be alarmed by Trump's words and behavior. The nation must confront the fact that beyond his hateful character, he is crippled cognitively and showing clear signs of mental illness. There's no need to resort to armchair psychology to interpret what's apparent. If victorious, Trump would be the oldest president ever inaugurated. In recent weeks, he has canceled an increasing number of public appearances, with Trump's own campaign citing the candidate's exhaustion. When he does appear publicly, Trump struggles to complete sentences or sustain coherent thoughts and has shown a pronounced difficulty concentrating and a tendency to repeat himself, sometimes within the same sentence. This is not an isolated incident. A recent analysis by the New York Times noted that Trump's rally speeches over the past 8 years have become darker, longer, more profane, and increasingly unfocused and unhinged, a troubling sign that he is no longer able to articulate ideas or reason in ways we expect of our leaders. This makes him prey to manipulations by his own staff, or worse, the control of foreign adversaries. He shambles about aimlessly, slurs his words, and sometimes speaks gibberish. Always an effortless liar, now that his speeches are nothing more than a series of lies tangled in a mass inside his head, it appears he no longer even knows he's lying. Wow.
Yeah. So someone finally told it like it is. That's an official editorial from the editorial page editors. And for what it's worth, it's in a swing state.
Yeah, and Nevada may be closer than you think, John.
Could be.
Usually, there's the Harry Reid machine is still kind of there. He was always pulling that state in for Democrats. So there's a chance.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm not saying there isn't. So I'm glad that word got out. So congratulations to the Las Vegas Sun.
Really?
Well, so we've gotten to Kamala's corner. And in this case, usually you pick out the clips, but we both felt so strongly about that speech. We loved it so much that we both had our favorite clips that we wanted to show.
Yeah.
And so what I've done is we've organized them chronologically as you move through the speech.
Yes.
Because actually, I think this speech is a beautifully crafted piece of work. I think it's really one of the great political speeches, Harry. There really are not that many moments where I feel speechless, where it takes my breath away, where I feel like I'm really witnessing a historic moment. And that's the way I felt when she was talking on that ellipse. Also, just to set the scene, there were 75,000 people there. It was a massive crowd. George Conway tweeted that he waited online for hours and finally gave up. But
they estimate that Trump had about 50,000 for his January 6th speech, which he said was bigger than Martin Luther King, right? That was that. No, it was really earned. I mean, all of that enthusiasm, all that presence was earned. I mean, they came at night. It's really pretty remarkable and wonderful, I think. And again, I just want to say one thing. Quoting Brownstein again, there was a way when Trump in October, this early part of this month, was saying those outrageous things every few days. They were crazier and crazier, and it worked. They pushed Kamala off the news cycle. And when Trump is being crazy and people are talking about him, he gains in popularity. And there was a slowing down of Kamala's rise and a kind of slight increase in Trump, and until she began to push back a week ago. And the great thing about our elections as we get close to the end is that you start to feel the shifts every day or so. And she's maintained it, but she's also maintained her dignity. Even though Biden made a kind of a dumb slip, she has refused to throw him under the bus. She has dignity, she has loyalty, and she's proclaiming her own vision of the presidency. And that's what I think, John, you and I saw in this amazing speech.
And the other thing I want to point out about the speech, one of the things points that you've made over and over again is that Kamala is kind of a case example of psychological health.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And we mean that. And we're not just saying that as partisans, and we mean that in a formal psychological sense. One of the things that is inspiring to me about this speech is the way that she weaves psychological maturity with political reality. So, for example, when she starts talking about what a dictator, so this next line we're going to hear is about him as a dictator. She's also linking it to his sort of defective character. Right. She's not using the term malignant narcissism, but she describes the characteristics of malignant narcissism, linking it to his authoritarian tendencies. And then she says, but that's not who we are.
Right.
Let's hear that.
And Donald Trump has told us his priorities for a second term. He has an enemies list of people he intends to prosecute. He says that one of his highest priorities is to set free the violent extremists who insulted those law enforcement officers on January 6th. Donald Trump intends to use the United States military against American citizens who simply disagree with him. People he calls, quote, the enemy from within. America, this is not a candidate for president who is thinking about how to make your life better. This is someone who is unstable, obsessed with revenge, consumed with grievance, and out for unchecked power. Donald Trump has spent a decade trying to keep the American people divided and afraid of each other. That is who he is. But America, I am here tonight to say that is not who we are. That is not who we are.
So powerful.
And clear and forceful and true.
Yeah. Yeah. Very well put. He's a malignant narcissist. He's she describes the characteristics of, he wants revenge. He's, grandiose. She sort of describes them without having to use diagnostic criteria, but describing the traits. And then she says, but we are not sick like him. Yeah. The next clip, I call it a lesson in object relations. One of the things that, just to give a little bit of obscure psychological theory, my mentor, Otto Kernberg, who's one of the world's experts on borderline personality disorder, basically said the world can be divided into three kinds of people. It sounds very simplistic, but people organized at the psychotic level, the borderline level, at the neurotic level. And neurotic is the best you can do. Whereas one of my supervisors used to say, the best you can hope for is that your children will be analyzable.
Well, that's true.
But the thing is that people organized at the borderline level, and I think these people are more vulnerable to Trump, organize the world into good and bad, black and white, us and them, right?
Strong and weak.
Strong and weak, right? And so we're going to be talking to, I'm so glad we have Stephen Ducat on today, who's an expert on tribalism. And so that rigid distinction of good people and bad people, inside and outside, is a more psychologically primitive way of seeing the world. Kernberg believed it was a more primitive level of psychological organization. These people had not sort of risen to the next developmental level. And what Kamala is talking about to me is not just about getting rid of division, and getting rid of racism. She's making, I think, a more profound psychological point here about how we can disagree with people, but still be attached to them and still be in a positive relationship with them. Because that's the difference, right? That Kernberg believes between neurotic level organization and borderline level of organization. Neurotic levels of organization is where you've integrated the good and bad. So it's like, yeah, mom's neurotic, she's a pain in the ass, but on the other hand, she's a sweet woman and she cares about me. And you have an integrated and stable and realistic view of the other, as opposed to the more primitive borderline view, which is more paranoid and projects all of the negativity onto the other and sees them as, and this is Trump's worldview, sees them as an invading, threatening force to be attacked and defeated.
Another way of putting that, John, would be to say that the healthier level of functioning sees things in more complex ways. That people are more than just their opinion or a position. And that with Trump, and we're seeing this also with his cognitive decline, it's more simplistic. So the more complex and integrative, in a way, the healthier somebody is.
Absolutely. And so here I feel like Kamala is with these, in this very human way, leading us to this model of greater human health.
You see, what Donald Trump has never understood is that e pluribus unum, out of many, one, isn't just a phrase on a dollar bill. It is a living truth about the heart of our nation. Our democracy doesn't require us to agree on everything. In fact, we like good arguments from time to time. Just think of your own family, right? It's not the American way to not have disagreements. We don't shy away from robust debate. In fact, we like a good debate, don't we? We like a good debate. And the fact that someone disagrees with us does not make them the enemy within. That's right. They are family, neighbors, classmates, co-workers. They are fellow Americans. And as Americans, we rise and fall together.
She humanizes. Look, these are your neighbors. It's like what happens in your family. You don't agree about everything, but we debate. As opposed to if someone disagrees with you, they're the enemy within. She's basically arguing against splitting, which is what borderlines do by dividing the world into all good and all bad, black and white, for me and against me. She's saying, no, we need to be more mature than that. Come on. This is how families are. This is how communities are. We can disagree with each other.
She's doing psychotherapy on the country.
She is doing psychotherapy.
Isn't she?
Thank
She's
you.
Saying, let's see it differently. Let's try on this lens and see if this reflects reality more than simply seeing people as enemies or allies.
So, I mean, talk about a choice election. I think as psychologists, one thing that we can see is one path is towards greater psychological health and maturity, and the other is a maelstrom of psychopathology, dragging us towards regression and aggression, right, and destruction. I mean, it just couldn't be clearer from a psychological point of view. Are we talking about the enemy within? Are we talking about, hey, listen, you disagree with members of your own family? We like a good debate. I also see what I did there. We love a good debate.
I love that she did that. That was so great, with such genuine pleasure.
Yeah.
That. Let's go on to the next one.
Yeah, go ahead. Well, so this is time for a new generation. This is very inspiring.
America, for too long, we have been consumed with too much division, chaos, and mutual distrust. And it can be easy then to forget a simple truth. It doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be this way. It is time to stop pointing fingers. We have to stop pointing fingers and start locking arms. It is time to turn the page on the drama and the conflict, the fear and division. It is time for a new generation of leadership in America. And I am ready to offer that leadership as the next President of the United States of America.
So she defines the problem and then says she can lead to go in that direction. And it feels earned. It feels convincing.
And her saying it doesn't have to be this way, I think really echoes with a lot of voters who are just so sick of the drama and the stress and the hatred and the conflict. And she's saying, look at the chaos. She's saying, look, it doesn't have to be this way. Harding won the presidency promising to return to normalcy. I think that's really what she's saying. Like, this is
John,
crazy.
that didn't turn out that well.
Didn't he win?
Yeah. And then he was thrown out of office for corruption.
All right, but he won.
But no, I agree with you. I think it doesn't have to be this way is her version of Make America Great Again. It's her slogan, and it's much more compelling and based in reality rather than based on fantasy.
Well, make America sane again. I mean, not as a slogan, but really, that's what she's saying. And don't we, at some levels, most of us long for that?
Well, let's hope a majority of us do.
Well, I think they do. I think a majority of people don't want to be crazy.
I think, and I don't think, that 47% of the country is psychologically disturbed, although I think Trump is. But it's very easy to get wrapped up in a simplistic worldview and then become resistant to any other arguments. It's and that's really unfortunate. She's trying to peel them away. She's trying to remind them that they don't have to think simplistically.
Right. All right, now Harry, let's continue with the speech. You had some.
I have two more. This one is, they're both kind of extensive, but let's take a listen.
And I did this work because for as long as I can remember, I have always had an instinct to protect. There's something about people being treated unfairly or overlooked that frankly just gets to me. I don't like it. It's what my mother instilled in me, a drive to hold accountable those who use their wealth or power to take advantage of other people. The drive to protect hardworking Americans who aren't always seen or heard and deserve a voice. And I will tell you that is the kind of president I will be. And look, I'll be honest with you, I'm not perfect. I make mistakes. But here's what I promise you. I will always listen to you, even if you don't vote for me. I will always tell you the truth, even if it is difficult to hear. I will work every day to build consensus and reach compromise to get things done. And if you give me the chance to fight on your behalf, there is nothing in the world that will stand in my way.
You know what I would call that? Progressivism without any sentimentality. Very direct, progressive in the sense that I've always wanted to protect people. And I don't like it, as she said. I don't like it when I see people being exploited.
She reminds me of the Republican president, Teddy Roosevelt. He was the same kind of fiery progressive, and his sense of justice. He couldn't stand the sense of injustice, and the Republicans didn't know what to do with him. Here he was, this millionaire, hypomanic, force of nature, and they kicked him upstairs to the vice presidency, actually, to get rid of him out of New York State, and then never thought that McKinley would be assassinated, and the party bosses actually put him there to get rid of him. But the thing is actually, I have a friend who was a Republican, worked for someone on the Hill, who was a Republican, and people say, well, what kind of he would say, well, I'm kind of a Teddy Roosevelt Republican. And he says they never knew what to say after that, because Teddy Roosevelt was a progressive. But it's that kind of, that instinct to protect, right? And so I think this is the kind of woman who can win the presidency, someone who makes us feel she's a lioness and she will protect us. Okay, that's what we want in a leader. And so she's giving it to us.
And she's saying that this is a quality that she's always had and has lived by.
Yeah.
She said, since I was little, I've always wanted to protect. She tells that heartbreaking story in high school of discovering that her best friend was being sexually abused by her stepfather and going to her mother and saying she has to live with us. And her mother saying, of course.
That's a great story.
Now, this last one is my very favorite part, and I'll try to explain why I think it's so beautiful.
I love our country with all my heart. And I believe in its promise because I've lived it. I grew up as a child of the Civil Rights Movement. My parents would take me to marches in a stroller where crowds of people of all races, faiths, and walks of life came together to fight for the ideals of freedom and opportunity. I've lived the promise of America. I saw how hard our mother worked to give her daughters the same chances this country gave her. Growing up, I was blessed to have family by blood and family by love, who instilled in me the values of community, compassion, and faith that have always defined our nation at its best. I've lived the promise of America. I've spent my life fighting for the people who have been hurt and counted out, but never stopped believing that in our country, anything is possible. I've lived the promise of America, and I see the promise of America in all of you. In all of you. I see it. I see it in the young people who are voting for the first time, who are determined to live free from gun violence and to protect our planet and to shape the world they inherit. I see it in the women who refuse to accept a future without reproductive freedom, and the men who support them. I see it in Republicans who have never voted for a Democrat before, but have put the Constitution of the United States over party. I've seen it in Americans different in many respects, but united in our pursuit of freedom, our belief in fairness and decency, and our faith in a better future. America, I know the vast majority of us have so much more in common than what separates us. I know it. And that's why I am in this race, to fight for the people, just like I always have.
Now that's the poetry.
Yeah.
Oh, it makes me cry. I have lived the promise of America.
Yeah.
And like good poetry, she returns to it 3 times. I have lived the. It sounds, I don't know, it sounds like 19th century poetry, right? I have lived the promise.
And this is from someone who was an English professor who got a PhD in English at Yale. I agree with you. It's poetic language. That's when I was comparing it to the Gettysburg Address. I mean,
Yeah.
I've lived the promise of America. That could be one of those lines that people remember. And it's so apropos in this atmosphere of virulent demonization of immigrants. But again, such a contrast between light and darkness. She's talking about the promise and the dream of American immigration, right? Her parents are immigrants. And here she is running for president of the United States. She has lived the American dream, and the American dream is a story about immigrants.
But John, it's even better than that. It's not I live the American dream. I've lived the American promise.
Promise, yes. That's better than dream. It's
promise,
cliched. Dream is cliched. You're right.
No, it's not about the cliche. It's that the promise suggests something that is to come. Right? So when she says, I have lived the promise, meaning she's received it, and then says, I see it in all of you. Ah,
it's terrific, Harry.
Just beautiful.
So, Harry, a lot of people have been asking us, could we have guests on this show who can tell us more about the psychology of Trump followers, not just the psychology of Trump? And so today I'm actually excited that we have on the show Dr. Stefan Ducat, who's a political psychologist, a psychoanalyst, a former psychology professor at the New College of California. But he's written a book, Hatreds We Love, The Psychology of Political Tribalism in Post-Truth America. So here on the eve of the election, where we're trying to understand this tribal warfare, he seems like he's a good person for us to talk to.
Definitely.
Hi, Dr. Ducat. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Excellent.
Yeah, your book has really come out at the right time.
Yeah, it's the headlines keep confirming in a very grim way many of my observations and analyses.
Well, maybe you could explain to the audience a little bit about the psychology of tribalism, what underlies it psychologically, evolutionarily, culturally. But also, I know you make a very important distinction between left-wing tribalism and right-wing tribalism. So I wanted to give you a chance to talk about that as well.
Yeah, and maybe the place to begin is to talk about my path to this focus, why this even surfaced to me as something that was important to understand.
Yeah.
And I'd have to say that, from the beginning of my awareness in politics, going back way too many decades, I've always been mystified by the apparent irrationality of people voting against their material self-interest.
Sure.
Something that I have thought about and puzzled over for a long time. And I could not understand the willingness of so many working and middle-class folks to elect politicians whose policies rendered their lives poorer, less free, sicker, and even shorter.
Didn't we see this in the 80s with Reagan and the farmers? That was the first time.
Absolutely. And actually, that was when I wrote my first book. It was in the 80s. It's scratching my head looking at, the adoration that Reagan, with which Reagan was received. And, so it's been a long path with a lot of detours in trying to address this question. But something happened with Trump's rise and the worship with which his base regarded him. Something really clicked for me. And I realized how naive I had been to think that material self-interest was the most powerful motive in politics. And of course, as psychologists, we know better. That's the nature of our work, in part, is to understand the kind of unconscious and mysterious and seemingly irrational drivers of human behavior. no less in politics than any place else. It became, but narrowing more specifically on tribalism, it became vividly apparent that membership in groups that give us a sense of meaning and identity, what I call tribes, is a much stronger driver of political behavior than I had realized.
Yeah.
And as I show in my book, and we can all see, people will kill and die for it. And so I should say that, tribe is a term of art in social science, but I use it primarily in the sort of colloquial way to refer to political and cultural groups that we're part of that confer a sense of belonging and identity. And tribes comprise people with whom we share values, beliefs, and a real and sometimes even imagined history. I mean, make America great again. Talk about imagined history.
A mythology.
A mythology, yeah. And so, a tribe can be constituted by people who share a myth, historical myths. And
some people think that's the Jews.
That's right. Well, the Jews, that's part of the plot, right?
They started that. They started that trend.
You peel back any conspiracy and you'll find the Jews hidden somewhere. Well, humans have always, of course, been social beings. From our first gasp of air to our last. We live in a world of profound interdependence because, as we know as psychologists, without others, we can't be a self, either psychologically or physiologically.
Absolutely.
And coming back to your question about the left and the right, I think left and right, people partisans of the left and right, think very differently about what it means to be in a tribe. That difference isn't absolute. It's a relative difference, but I think a significant one. And that difference centers largely around the nature of boundaries, the membranes within which groups are encased. Who belongs inside and who belongs outside the tribal border. And in general, for liberals, tribal boundaries are more semi-permeable, kind of like cell membranes.
Right, that's what I was thinking.
Selectively let things in and out.
Yeah.
For conservatives, however, they tend to be rigid and impermeable. And those on the right are especially worried about boundaries concerning race, ethnicity, religion, sexuality, and gender. And maybe we'll get to this later, but I think this fantasy of an impermeable boundary that keeps out the bad and keeps in the good is related to another kind of moral intuition that researchers have found conservatives tend to share, which is a preoccupation with purity and a very significant salience for disgust. And we can get that, talk more about that.
Yeah.
But to remain loyal members of the GOP specifically, many voters on the right will oppose politicians and policies that give them health insurance, protect them from disease, reduce their exposure to life-threatening environmental poisons. And there's an anecdote that I talk about, share in my book, that happened. Some of you may remember that during the height of the pandemic, pharmacies around the country created backdoor entrances to vaccination rooms, so that Republicans could discreetly enter, get the shot without being seen by their by their conservative neighbors and friends. Some of them even wore disguises. And so part of what that told me was that what was happening is that they were trying to prevent biological death without risking social death. Because, of course, anti-vax beliefs were very much woven into right-wing identity, helped in large measure by Donald Trump.
Go ahead, John.
Well, you also link the right-wing tribalism to, I guess, what most of us studied in school is the authoritarian personality disorder, or authoritarian personality. But this attraction to, you've mentioned some of the differences in the right wing and left wing. One is these a much more rigid sense of the other, right, with these boundaries, right, as to who's in and who's out.
Yeah.
But there's also other characteristics that go along with this, and including the will to dominance.
Yeah. So you could think about what has made the MAGA cult so adherent to Trump in a number of ways, and I think all the work that you've done on Trump psychopathology is profoundly important, but it does beg the question: well, why does it work?
Yeah,
it does beg that.
We look at somebody like that with, oh my God, that person is so profoundly unfit. But there's something about his pathology that actually speaks to aspects of his case in very compelling ways. And I think there are kind of two aspects of it. There's a relational aspect, like what he communicates to his base and how he interacts with them. And we can talk about that in a moment. But then there are the predispositions, the kinds of people who are susceptible to the MAGA appeal. And that has more to do with the psychological predispositions of those on the right. And I have to say, this is not unique to the Trump base. And this is where, many of my, colleagues in politics who are never Trumpers, but insist that Trump is an aberration from conservatism, I would take issue with respectfully. I think there is a lot of reasons why Trump emerged in the Republican Party. This was not random. And there are psychological traits, including the social dominance orientation we'll talk about in a moment, that have been around since antebellum America. Conservatives have had a contiguous worldview. Maybe they were Democrats 150 years ago, but there's continuity there. So, when we talk about differences, psychological difference between conservatives and liberals, we have to bear in mind that the differences are not absolute, and there's some overlap, but the differences are quite significant. And some of the traits of conservatives can be found in liberals. And in fact, my critique of identity politics and rigidity on the left is not a critique of their liberalism, but a critique of their illiberalism, their failures to question authority, the fetishizing of identity, the lapse into kind of purity. But in general, conservatives tend to score higher on a number of traits: disgust sensitivity, xenophobia, in-group loyalty, deference to traditional authority, a concern for sanctity and purity. And then probably one of the most powerful is the social dominance orientation. The preference for hierarchical relationships between groups. And what goes along with that social dominance orientation is a sense of entitlement. Well, because our group is superior, then we have every right in the world to take your stuff or to take you. In the case of slavery. And so that, and not so shorthand, but one consequence of all of that is that those on the left tend to be more xenophilic. They're attracted to novelty. It's exciting. They want to eat all kinds of food and go places and meet new people, as opposed to the xenophobic tendency among conservatives.
And not to get into the weeds as psychologists, but people have considered erotic desire as sometimes being drawn towards sameness and identification, and sometimes toward the exotic, what's different. And it sounds like you're dividing that kind of movement to either side of. I have another question quickly about Ronald Reagan, only because one thing that I've noticed about Trump is that he's very charismatic and he creates a sense that everyone is part of an in-group.
Mm-hmm.
Like he treats his rallies as if, come on, you guys, we're all the same. We're together. And Reagan did the same kind of thing, I think, with much less of a kind of a malevolent ideology, although it had problems. But there was a comedian in the 80s who once said that when Reagan was elected, he wasn't going to be president. He was going to host the country.
Yeah.
Right. So there was that sense that Reagan, too, with his television experience, like Trump's television experience, not to mention Reagan's movie experience, but to create that sense that we're together and people who oppose us aren't really American, aren't really correct.
But I think that even though, Reagan and Trump are radically different stylistically, I mean, I could put myself in the frame of mind of someone that loved Reagan. I didn't love him at all. I thought he was appalling, but I could understand I could see the charm through the eyes of conservatives.
Yes.
That's something that I've had a really hard time doing through the minds of MAGA worshipers, because to me, Trump seems like a humorless, charmless, repellent person that I wouldn't want to even talk to at a party. Run the country. But they have something in common that I think is important to call attention to. I'm kind of glad you brought that up, because even though it's far in the past, what they were able to achieve is a phenomena called identity fusion. Identity fusion is something that anthropologists and psychologists have talked about for many, many decades, which is the kind of evolved tendency to ensure loyalty, individual loyalty to the group, by encouraging people to identify so powerfully with the group that they would die for the group, that they would be willing to sacrifice themselves for the interests of the group. And, that has had, certain there's certain selection pressures that made sense in evolutionary terms, in terms of the development of human society. It has now become a dangerous fetter on human development and threatens the species as well as the rest of the planet.
Right.
But this kind of identity fusion is something that both Reagan and Trump and other leaders have achieved, which is creating a sense that the leader and the group are one.
Yes.
And so if you are loyal to the group, you have to be loyal to the leader. And, there's that famous phrase from, I think it's Louis, the French king, Louis XIV, l'état c'est moi. The state, it is I.
It is me. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, the idea is that, you are being a good citizen. You are loyal to the group if you are loyal to me. The whole notion, the head of state, and so it's interesting that metaphor was used, and decapitation was used when they were overthrown. But, it's
cut the head off.
Cut the head off. Yeah. And so both Reagan and Trump have cultivated this sense of identity fusion by merging their persona in this cult of personality with the group. And, there's this scene, I don't know if you remember, in a couple of his speeches, I talk about this in the book, where Trump, we often talk about politicians wrapping themselves in the flag. Well, Trump wrapped the flag in himself. He would kind of hug the flag. Which symbolically is pretty powerful. It's not just that he is now merged with the state, but he has subsumed the state. He is the group.
Yeah. He is the Louis King. One of the things we were talking about earlier is that we're seeing the biggest gender gap in history. in history between Trump and Kamala Harris. I know you wrote a book about the gender gap. How can we understand why the gender gap would be so extreme between these two candidates?
Well, I think to really understand that, we have to kind of take a step back and look at the role that defensive hypermasculinity has played in politics for a long time. I mean, as you mentioned, in 2005, I wrote a book called The Wimp Factor, Gender Gaps, Holy Wars, and the Politics.
Oh, that's right. I didn't realize that was your book. Okay.
Yeah. And the term wimp factor comes from what was George Bush Sr.'s political vulnerability, which is, the supposed failure, to be macho, sufficiently macho. And so this, as you point out, this has become probably the greatest single determinant among multiple determinants of support for Trump.
That's right.
And so in that earlier book, I talk about something I call femophobia, which is the men's fear of being female. Men, masculine and
that's
feminine.
what the anti-trans panic is about.
Yeah, I mean, that's why they're making that such an issue.
Interesting.
It's part of it, because here you have in the, especially male to female transsexuality or transgender, you have the kind of real life expression of their worst fears, that something feminine in themselves will flower. And so femophobia is precisely the fear that men have of being feminine. And, and I put feminine in quotes because, of course, certain qualities that are part of human experience are designated by femophobic males, going all the way back to ancient Greece, as the property of women. So it's almost as if they develop in a world in which a large constellation of their traits are designated as contaminants, kindness, tenderness, sensitivity, empathy, those kinds of things. So human qualities. But because they get designated as feminine, men who fear that, develop hypermasculine defenses to repudiate it.
Right.
And I just want to say that in my first book, part of what I found is I developed measures of femophobia and found that they were highly correlated, unsurprisingly, with a right-wing worldview.
Interesting.
That conservative males in particular were far more femophobic.
Interesting.
Those feminine aspects were much more ego dystonic, to use a term of jargon, than for right-wing males and for liberals.
Can I just jump in for a second? This is fascinating. When you were talking about tribes, the right wing being impermeable and the left being more permeable, and I was thinking, first of all, does that mean that the more permeable tribe is also more feminine? Because I'm thinking about Kamala Harris saying, if you disagree with me, I want you to have a seat at the table. Like, she's expanding and she's making the membrane more permeable as attempting to get to the center. And is this something that maybe in terms of sort of our socialized gender roles, that's something that is at times considered more female?
Well, I think the link here between all these things is social dominance.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
And this is part of what has made traditional masculinity so brittle. I don't mean masculinity in a general sense, but I mean this kind of mainstream notion of masculinity, which is founded, going again all the way back to the ancient Greeks, on a notion of manhood as being one of wielding domination over others. And the problem with that as a definition of masculinity is extremely brittle. because you could be a top today, but a bottom tomorrow. And so everything, all human experience gets reduced and translated into either submission or dominance, femininity or masculinity. So Kamala's approach is a collaborative one. Well, collaboration in many ways is the antithesis of domination, which is why I think it gets coded feminine.
So really, this this culture of toxic masculinity around Trump is attracting people who are trying to shore up their masculinity.
Yeah, yeah. And the thing about proving manhood is that you never get there. It's
well,
the ultimate,
unless you're really close to Arnold Palmer, right?
right, spiritually close. Yes, as Trump is.
People couldn't believe it. They just couldn't. When they went to the towers, it was unbelievable.
Yeah, yeah. And so it's a Sisyphean effort,
right?
You know, because if it's based on power over other people, which is why dictatorships are so unstable, and why it really bothers me when people refer to dictators and Trump as a strong man. That's how they want to see themselves. You know, why do them the favor of calling them strong men? They're brittle men.
Yes, and certainly Trump is, right? He's so easily narcissistically injured, so thin-skinned, right? Certainly doesn't seem like someone who's strong. He seems like what does Bill Maher call him? A whiny little bitch.
Yeah,
And months ago, Trump appeared on Fox and Friends, the Saturday team, who John and I were really justifiably making fun of, because they worshiped him and they were repeating all of the myths as if they were true. One of them even saying, your ability to work late at night is legendary, right? And so if you accept Trump's myths and you are worshiping him, that's where I think the charm comes in. That's where even I see it, although like you, I find it hard to get into the space of Trump supporters, but he's remarkable if he gets those conditions met.
The paradigmatic example of what you're talking about is that famous clip of the Trump cabinet meeting where Pence not only is fawning, but trying to mimic every movement that Trump makes. I mean, talk about identity fusion.
And you remember he asked every member of the cabinet to thank him for how great he was. And they went around the room. It was eerie. And you're right. It's a kind of brittleness, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's a really good point.
And if the fact that he might get it today doesn't mean he's not going to be desperately hungry for it tomorrow.
That's right.
It can't be internalized.
You never get enough narcissistic supplies. Absolutely.
And that's one of the more common, I think, public misunderstandings about narcissism is people think about it as people who love themselves too much. It's precisely the opposite.
Exactly. I talk about it on the show as being this fear of collapsing at any moment. And so the grandiosity has to be puffed up through adulation and sadistic comments about others and their inferiority. And if you're suffering cognitive decline, then you better call Kamala Harris mentally disabled. Right?
Yeah.
Stupid.
Well, hopefully after this election, we'll be able to make the boundaries of Red America a little more permeable. And maybe we can hopefully, after we win this election, unite. I really appreciate your coming today. Harry, did you have any other questions?
No, but I really think you've given us ways of thinking about this that we really hadn't, at least I hadn't come across. And so I'm very grateful. And it would be nice if regardless of who wins, there's going to be a reaction either way.
So Trumpism is not going away.
So it would be nice to have you back on at some point to talk.
I would love to. And if Kamala Harris does win, then I can disconnect the IV drip of Xanax It's keeping me going.
Yeah, the pharmacies are running out of those.
Yeah.
But what kind of man are you?
Yeah, it's a very anxious one right
Very
now.
anxious one. Amen. Okay.
Well, thank you so much for your interest. It's been a lot of fun chatting.
Good.
Oh,
Good talking
it's
to
great
you
to
too.
have you.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks so much.
Take care.
All
Bye-bye.
right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Well, I guess we've gotten to the shrink wrap section of our show in the very last show before the election. So what have we learned from all of this, Harry?
Well, before we go into shrink wrap, I just wanted to say that some of you have been asking us about whether we want to continue the show after the election, because really we came on to try to alert the public and educate the media and to allow the country to become more psychologically aware, right? And John and I have been talking about it, and we certainly think it'd be a good idea, no matter who wins, to continue the show until inauguration. And after that, we'll see. We'll talk about it and see whether there are things that we can talk about that would be of interest to all of you. But we do want you to know that we'll be with you come hell or high water until January 20th at least.
Wow.
So what did we learn today? Well, I guess I'm so struck by that speech. You know what poetry can really do, and modern poetry is found in hip hop and rap music. It's in contemporary music, but what poetry has always been able to do is to take ideas and, in a way, to concentrate them and abstract them until there's something lyrical that lifts your emotions, giving you an idea, but also inviting you to imagine it and to fill in the blanks of it. "I've lived the promise of America" is a poetic line because it invites you to join the idea in some way. It's not a policy proposal. It's not an attack. It's not a promise. It's a piece of poetry. And one of the wonderful things about human beings is that we can respond when we're evoked, when these poetic feelings are evoked in us. And I think we have to hold on to this hope and hold on to this kind of promise, because we are all sitting here waiting for something to happen. We can contribute to it a bit. We can vote. We can call our friends. We can canvass. We can start a podcast. There are things we can do. But ultimately, we're going to have to wait without the power to decide what's going to happen. But we do have to believe in the angels of our nature. And I have this feeling that ultimately that's how the country will move. I do.
I do too. And, in deciding how to dress today for what could be which is the last show before the election, I chose something with a little personal significance. This is the tie I wore on my wedding day.
Oh, yeah, it is, isn't it?
Because you were there. You're making a toast as my best man and best friend, which is still remembered. So to me, this tie represents hope.
Mm-hmm.
After 2 divorces, if you get married a 3rd time, you must have some hope, even if it's irrational.
Even if your first 2 wives are there cheering you on.
Which they were.
They were.
Bless them. So I think the thing is that to me, this is a symbol of hope. Mm-hmm. And I think that I do have hope, and but more than hope, I have some optimism and some faith that we are going to get through this just by the skin of our teeth.
Yes.
Just by the skin of our teeth. And I think, I know you and I don't see this the same way, but I see a divine hand in this rescue. It certainly wasn't by any human hand that we decided to bring that racist comedian to Madison Square Garden, and that it would have this electric effect on the Puerto Rican community. Because here's the thing, Harry, I believe we are going to win. And I think we're going to win primarily because of women. But I think we're also going to win because of Puerto Ricans.
I think so too. And before we say goodbye, I just have one more thing I want to say in response to your tie. In the height of the Stalin period, where intellectuals and dissidents were tormented and put in gulags, Alexander Solzhenitsyn wrote a book called The First Circle. And it was about a prison camp in Moscow filled with scientists doing things that Stalin wanted them to do and to invent. And one of the characters, who's this heartbreaking, wonderful character, is married to a woman who's getting a PhD in literature. And he's allowed to see her once a year for an hour. And it's a heartbreaking scene where he sees her in this room and they start to kiss and the guard tells them not to. And she became a symbol, an extraordinary symbol, because her name was Nadia. And Nadia in Russian means hope. And when other writers in the Soviet bloc were writing their illegal novels like Solzhenitsyn's, passing them around in mimeograph form, in many of those novels in Eastern Europe, they always included a woman named Nadia. And when my wife and I at the time adopted our daughter from Moscow, I insisted that we give her middle name as Nadia because of hope. And I think when you think of the Soviet Union and you think of all of that oppression, and an autocratic state, which we are in danger of falling into, I think we have to remember hope. And so I'm so pleased that you wore your tie today.
Thank you, Harry. Well, we're going to go out on a tribute to Puerto Rico.
Definitely. Because we love Puerto Rico.
We love Puerto Rico. Viva la Puerto Rico. Rex.
Definitely.
Viva la Puerto Rico. Hey. Arriba, arriba.
Stay calm, folks. Keep the faith. Have a good weekend. Don't forget to vote. We'll see you next week.